Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first super tournament of the great year 2024. Now, the event in question is the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, which is being held in the city of Wijk aan Zee in the country of the Netherlands. Now, this is a very, very prestigious event. It's been held over the past 86 years. I believe it is currently the longest running tournament, and in many ways, it is considered the Wimbledon of chess, with many strong players and world champions having competed over the years. So, first game we're going to be taking a look at today is a game that features none other than the current world chess champion, Ding Liren from China. Now, Ding has been missing or absent for a very long time. He did return to play this Chess Kings tournament in China last week, which did not go very well for him. He won his first match against Bai Jinshi, of which we did a recap video of, but in the semifinals, he lost to, I believe, Wang Hao, if I am not mistaken. So, without further ado, let's jump into the game. Now, Ding Liren off to a little bit of a slow start in the first two games. He had a draw with black, a draw with white, and today he's playing against Gukesh Damaraju, the very talented Indian junior player who is currently qualified for the Canada's tournament, which will be held in April in Toronto, Canada. All right, so game starts out with the move e4, and now we get the move e5 from Ding. Knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4. Ding plays knight f6, d3, bishop c5, and we get the move c3. Now, this, of course, is the classic Gucci piano, with both sides developing their bishops very early. And in many ways, this is the battleground opening at the top level, much more so than one of the old favorites, which was, of course, the classic Spanish. So, we get a4 from Gukesh. Ding plays a5. Now, one thing I've mentioned in many videos and during my live stream while I was covering this is that to me, it's not really clear what the differences are. The computer says you can play a5 or a6, and both moves are considered to be reasonable. Now, you do need to move a pawn here, because if you don't move a pawn, and let's say you castle, after b4, the bishop has no squares available here on d4, e3, or f2. And when you retreat to b6, now there's a5, and the bishop is simply going to be lost, and you'll be down material, and you should lose the game. So, we get a5 from Ding, bishop g5 is played, h6, bishop h4, we get bishop to a7. Now, this is also another situation where the computer gives black multiple options. You can put the bishop on a7 or on b6, and once again, like all my fellow human competitors, we do not understand why the computers say that both moves are playable, and frankly, what really the difference is between the options. Nonetheless, Ding plays bishop to a7. We get the move knight to a3 from Gukesh, intending to put the knight on b5, because black has pushed his pawn to a5 to stop b4, but now you've loosened the square on b5, where white can have a nice outpost for the horse. Ding plays queen e7. We get the move knight to b5. Ding plays bishop b6 back. We get queen to b3, and now we have this move g5. Very aggressive move from Ding, but a very logical move. Ding could try to castle here on the king side right away, and white would castle here on the queen side. Now, the danger if there is an opposite side castle is now if black plays g5 to try and break this pin, white can maybe even sack the horse here and go for something like rook f1 and f4 down the road. And even though the computer says that black is better after bishop to e6, it feels very scary with rook f1 and f4 incoming and a lot of pressure on the f file. So Ding decides to go g5 in one go, and now we have bishop g3. Knight takes pawn would be a serious blunder, because after pawn takes knight, bishop takes pawn, black can sack the bishop, with bishop takes pawn checking the king. King takes bishop allows knight to g4, and after king e2 and queen takes g5, looks like white is winning material with knight takes pawn, forking the king and the rook. But you move the king, white takes the rook, and now you have this move knight takes h2, followed by bishop g4 or queen takes g2, and the white king on e2 is completely stuck, and black will win the game. So we have bishop g3 being played. Ding castles now, because without this idea of the sack, he's not really worried when Gukesh decides to castle to the queen side. So after queen side castle, we get the move knight to h5. And what Ding is banking on here is that this bishop on b6 is super active on this diagonal from b6 towards the pawn on f2. And white's dark square bishop, has very limited activity. It's staring at a bunch of pawn walls here. And for that reason, Ding expects to be able to activate this bishop on the diagonal, maybe play f5. And it's actually really quite hard for white to attack on the king side. If you play h4 trying to open it up, I can simply go g4, and after knight d2 and king g7, you cannot push the f pawn, because then you hang the bishop, and I'm preparing to go f5 and open up the f file for my rook, or a diagonal for my light square bishop on f5. So what does Ding do? Or I should say, what does Gukesh do? He plays the move d4. Now, one general theme in chess is when your opponent starts pushing p or attacking on the edge of the board, what you want to do is you want to play in the center of the board. So d4 thematically makes a lot of sense. When one side plays on the flank, you try to open up the center, and in this case it makes a lot of sense also because you try to open up the diagonal for this bishop on g3. So we get e takes d4, and here Gukesh plays knight b takes d4. We get g4 attacking this knight. Gukesh plays knight to h4, trying to plop a horse on f5 or maybe g6 as well due to the pin of the pawn and the king. We have bishop takes knight being played by Ding. Gukesh recaptures, and now we get this move queen takes e4. Now what's going on here is that Ding is currently up a pawn, but what he's really hoping for is that he can consolidate his position. Let's just say he can put the queen back on h7, go bishop d7 and rook e8, or another big idea is maybe even put this knight on b4 where the pawn holds the knight at night, and now there are all these threats towards the white king on a2 or the c2 square as well. So a very, very critical position here, very, very chaotic. Now, of course, in true computer fashion, it says no big deal. The position's completely drawn, 0.0, no worries. Why? Well, what's the big deal? In a human game, of course, it's quite different because neither player knows what is going on, and they're trying to play the best moves. So we get rook hg1, Ding goes queen to h7, and now we have the move rook d2, which is a very serious error. Now, I don't really fault Gukesh for playing rook d2. Probably thought he could maybe stack the rooks on the file, something of this nature. But in the meantime, rook d2 does nothing, and black is already up one pawn here, so wasting time on a move like rook d2 is not in the spirit of the position. Now, the computer here actually says that after bishop to d3, queen to g7, for example, white can play this move knight to g6, and after knight takes bishop, white takes the rook, black plays king f8, and after fg3 and knight d4, white can go queen d5, and the position should be equal. Now, probably what Gukesh saw was something along these lines where black can check, trade, and black is a knight and two pawns for the rook, and he probably figured there was no attack, and black maybe even is a little bit better. Now, computer, of course, thinks that this is close to equal, if not slightly advantageous for white, but when you're thinking about these positions, you're thinking about the spirit of it, it feels like you're down a pawn, you have opposite side king castles, black has pushed the pawns on the king side. Thematically, it feels like you need to try and attack. So that's why we get rook d2. Now we have bishop to d7, a very nice move from Ding, developing the bishop, intending to play knight b4, and also having the idea to go rook a e8 and offer a trade of the rooks on the only open file of the board. So after bishop to d7, we have bishop d3 being played, not queen takes b7, by the way, because this pawn is poisoned. Black can play rook a e8. Let's say you go rook d1, for example, and now after knight b4, there's serious threats towards the pawn on a4. There are threats towards c2 and a2, and computer already thinks that white is completely lost, also because the queen on b7 is somewhat stuck here. Maybe you can retreat at some point, but very, very hard to play. So Gukesh goes bishop d3, we have queen g7, and now bishop f5 played here, trying to exchange the light square bishops and put a knife on f5. Ding decides to trade, but now he has queen g5, and the white knight here on f5 is very, very unstable. You can't really keep it on the square easily. Additionally, there's a pin towards the rook on d2, as well as the king on c1, and black can go rook e8, and due to these reasons, or I should say for these reasons, black simply has a serious advantage. Now here Gukesh plays queen b5, which is a serious mistake. Computer says after queen b7, queen f5, and queen c6, rook a b8. White is worse here, but maybe it's not game over in this position because you can play something like queen e4, trying to bring the queen back and target the pawn on the king side, and maybe there's still some chances. Instead, we get the move queen b5, and now Ding plays rook fe8. Here we have the move rook to e3, which effectively loses the game on the spot. What Gukesh needed to do was trade the rooks and go knight to e3, and here he maintains pressure towards the pawn on g4, also some pressure towards the pawn on b7, as well as the knight in c6, and the computer does not think that white is all that much worse. But when we get the move rook to e3, now Ding is able to play knight g7, and this has turned into a classic positional masterpiece, because what has happened here is white is still left with this terrible dark square bishop on g3 that is staring at a pawn, while you have no scope, no squares for the bishop, and in the long run, this knight on c6 is going to go to either b4 or pressure the pawn on d4, and positionally speaking, white is actually completely lost. So we get knight takes knight, Ding plays king takes knight, and now Gukesh goes d5, and Ding trades the rooks on e3 and plays this great move knight to b4. Now the dark square bishop is a little bit active. You do have a square on f4, but you'll notice this knight on b4 is stuck, or not stuck, I guess I should say it's outposted, or it is a bastion, with the pawn on a5 guarding the knight, and this white king is very, very weak on c1 because black can go for ideas like queen f5, c6, and rook c8, and white can never remove this knight from b4, so there always are going to be threats near the king. So Gukesh decides to play queen takes pawn. We get rook to e8, bishop f4 played here, preventing the capture of the pawn on e3. But now Ding goes queen to f5. Here Gukesh plays queen b5, and now we get knight to a2 check being played, king d1, and now queen to b1. And just like that, all of black's pieces are in the game. The queen on b1, the knight on a2. White still has no real threats towards the king on g7 here, and it's just pretty much hopeless. So we get king e2. Ding goes queen g1, threatening to take the pawn on g2, but much more importantly, if white takes this what looks like a free rook on e8, there's knight to c1, and the king has no squares available, and this is quite simply a checkmate situation with the king being stuck on e2. So Gukesh plays king to d3, but now the game concludes after knight to b4 check, king to d4, and now let's move queen to e1. Ding leaves the rook hanging on e8. Rook d3 is played. We have queen to e2, pressuring the rook again, and now rook c3 is played. If Gukesh were to capture the rook, queen takes d3 once again would be checkmate. So rook c3 played here by Gukesh. Ding goes queen d2 check, king c4. We get rook to e4 check, and now Gukesh resigns the game in view of the fact that after king b3 here, there's a forced checkmate with queen d1 check. If you block with the rook, I just take the rook for free, and after king to a3, there's queen a1 check, king b3, and queen to a2. Knight guards the queen, covers the other escape square. Rook also covers c4, and the white king gets stuck on b3. So after rook to e4, Gukesh resigns this game. Ding gets his first one of the tournament. He now moves to a score of 2 points out of 3 with 2 draws and a win. Very, very important win for Ding to start the turn, start getting the wheels going, starting to turn it on, and he shows it, at least in classical chess, he still has it. So the next game we're going to be taking a look at is a game being played between Parham Maghsoodloo, the very talented Iranian #2 player after Alireza Firouzja, and Noturbek Abdusattorov from Uzbekistan. Now Noturbek is a player who has started off the year very hot the past couple of years. In fact, last year he was very close to winning this tournament and Tata Steel until he lost in the last round to Jordan Van Forest. Now the rest of the year didn't go as planned, but he did have a great start. So anytime you see players like Parham and Noturbek playing, you expect the game to be very interesting and to have a fighting result. So all right, so Parham opens with c4. We get e5, knight c3, knight f6, classic English opening, and now the move knight f3 is played here by Parham. Now Noturbek plays e4. Now I've just said now like 20 times. E4 is played here, and this is a new idea, or I shouldn't say it's new anymore, but I remember all the way back in 2022 as I was preparing for the FIDE Grand Prix held in Berlin, Germany, that my trainer Chris Littlejohn mentioned this idea with e4 at the time because there were a couple of players who'd been playing this online quite a bit. Now those two players were Samuel Sevian from the United States of America and my cousin Vinny Kamer from Germany as well. Now this is a new idea because after knight g5 it looks like black is simply losing the pawn on e4. What to do after queen e7, queen c2? How do you guard the pawn? If you push, I take the pawn. If you go d5, well, you're just down a pawn and losing. But as we've seen, computers are very, very remarkable. They've shown us that all these different concepts can be played, and this has actually become something of mainline theory in the last year and a half. So we get this move c6, which is played here by Noturbek, and Parham plays the move queen a4 after a bit of a think. Now white can grab the free pawn on e4, but after takes d5, takes knight g3, black can play his move h5 here, and white has moved the knight all over the board. Black is gaining a lot of space with h4, and it's not really clear what the objective evaluation is after e3, h4, knight e2. Let's say knight c6, d4, and bishop d6 with queen f6, for example. Computers give white a small advantage if you have it at low depth, but as it gains more depth, the computers, I think, say that it's about equal, but it's a very, very dynamic and very tricky position to play for both sides. Parham decides to play queen a4 instead, and his plan is that this prevents black from playing d5, guarding the pawn, because after pawn takes pawn, spaghetti-o, you can't recapture due to the pin, and white is simply much better. So Noturbek goes queen to e7, protecting his pawn on e4 with the queen and the knight here, and now we have the move f3 from Parham. Now, having looked at this variation with both colors in the past and during my live stream as well, I mentioned that the move queen c2 is probably a little bit safer here, because now black normally will play b5 here, sacking a pawn on the wing, and in return he gets the big black center with the pawns on d5 and e4 guarding everything. Now after takes h6, knight h3, and queen c7, it's a very, very tricky position. Very hard to judge what is going on because black will win this pawn on c6 and be down a pawn. Meanwhile, white has his knight on the rim and black has these central pawns which can be moved up the board down the road. So very hard to judge what's going on, but Parham decides he's not having it and he plays the move f3. Now another thing that I will point out is it seems that Parham is a little bit underprepared in this event. Yesterday in a game against Alireza Firouzja, he lost out of the opening in a very well-known theoretical line, which is known to be a draw simply because he forgot a move order or complicated something. And so between that and then today, using his time to play queen a4 and playing f3, which is not considered the best line, it seems like he's a little bit underprepared relative to the players that he's faced so far in the event. So Noterbeck trades on f3, knight takes played, we get g6 here, Noterbeck intending to fianchetto the bishop and castle the king out of the center of the board. We get d4 from Parham. Now this is a move that I do not like here. Probably if I were playing, I'd go e3, bishop e2, and castles. Play it very, very simply, but Parham has an actual straightforward concept in mind. So we get d4, bishop to g7 is played here, and now we have the move c5. We get castles and bishop to f4. So what Parham is trying to do is he's trying to stop black from bringing in this light square bishop, as well as pushing this d pawn in the center of the board. Now if you get this position, let's say rook e8, queen d8, I'm just going to set this up, something like this for example. White is much better here because the knight, the bishop, and the rook can't be developed, and black would love to magically put this pawn on d5 and bring the light square bishop out, but you cannot do that. So in this position, we get the move knight a6 from Noterbeck, and this is a very, very inspired approach. This is one thing that I have to point out as well. Computers have shown us that all sorts of sacrifices are playable if you have some form of positional compensation. So you're like, knight a6, what's going on? White goes bishop d6 like in the game. White's going to win material. What is Noterbeck doing? He's losing a rook for a bishop. He's a terrible chess player, right? Well, not so fast, because in this position, Noterbeck plays move queen e3. Now, queen e3 is not a move that I like. I would have actually preferred queen e6, because now when white takes the rook, black has sacked the rook for a bishop, but their ideas like b6, d6, white now actually has a similar problem where this light square bishop is hemmed in because you cannot push the e pawn, and if you can't push the e pawn forward, then your bishop on f1 is very, very passive here, and black has some serious compensation in this position. Instead, we get the move queen to e3. Parham correctly plays knight to d1, kicking the queen away. We have queen to e6, and now we get this inexplicable move knight to f2 from Parham. Now the reason this move is somewhat inexplicable is because Noterbeck did not go queen e6 in one go. So here you could simply take the rook and play e3 with the idea of bishop e2, bishop d3, or bishop c4 and castles, and white is simply better here. Now that's why in this position queen e6 would have been a better move, because after takes, you cannot go e3 here because it would be captured and you would lose the game. So it's very, very perplexing that after queen to e6, now Parham plays this move knight to f2, and I really don't know what the explanation for this move is, other than maybe Parham was unsure, and after this bruising loss yesterday to Alireza, he's not feeling as confident. So we have knight to f2, now rook to e8 is played, and here black is not even down material, and he can activate the light square bishop by playing for b6. Also, it's not really clear where this white king is going if you can't go g3 or e3. So Parham plays h4, and now we get this move b6 being played. Computer actually likes h6 a little bit more to stop this knight g5 idea attacking the queen. Nonetheless, we have b6 being played, knight g5 from Parham, and now we get queen to f5, which is a serious mistake. Computer says after queen to d5, black maintains a small advantage here, whereas after queen to f5, now white can harass the queen with this nasty g4 move. We get the move queen to d5 being played. Now knight g4 would have been better, but hard to blame Noterbeck. After takes, and queen b3, suddenly there's massive pressure towards this pawn on f7. It's very, very difficult to guard, and if you go queen f5, white now has bishop g2 followed by rook to f1, and there's all kinds of pressure on this diagonal, and black is in a lot of trouble. And I think frankly in a human game you would simply lose this position with the black pieces, because black has no obvious moves and white has a very simple plan in this position. So Noterbeck plays queen d5. We now get castles from Parham, and Noterbeck takes on c5. D takes c5, knight takes c5, and Parham makes a huge mistake here with this move queen c2. Goes from being +3 to -2. What Parham needed to play was this quiet move queen to a3, pressuring the knight and the queen here. Knight on f2 guards the rook on h1, because after queen c4 and king b1, black has a serious problem with this queen. If you move the knight to say b7, for example, white has e4, which traps the queen on c4. Knights cover the critical squares, bishop hits the queen. There's simply no way for black to save the queen, and he loses the game. Computer says the best way for black to play here is something like queen to a6, but after bishop takes c5, white simply has an extra bishop on the board, and the rest should be fairly routine. And if you play something like knight f e4, which is another idea here, White goes e3. Queen is still trapped. It says queen a4 is the best move, but after takes, knight takes e4, knight b2, and rook to d4 here. White is simply winning the game. If you don't move the knight, you'll lose it. If you take what looks like a free rook, now the knight is under attack, but I'm also threatening to fork the king and the rook with knight f6, and it's all completely hopeless. So Parham here plays this move queen c2 after 4-minute think, and now the game goes way back in the other direction, because after queen takes a2, Black sacks a knight here, but queens stay on the board, and also there's now rook b8, and suddenly there are massive threats on this diagonal. There are ideas like queen a1, and computer says that white is in a lot of trouble. So Parham goes b4 here, trying to get rid of the weakness, and now the bishop and the pawn support each other. But after queen to a3, we have king to d2, and now this great move, knight to d5, threatening to play bishop c3, knight to e3, or knight takes b4. Parham plays the move rook to h3, and he's probably hoping here that after rook h3, if black were to play queen a6, now you have e4, creating the classic double attack and a fossil. Knight and queen are under attack, and white is winning the game. But unfortunately for Parham here, Noterbeck has a move, and even worse than it being a good move, it is the only move to not be in trouble, and Noterbeck finds it, which is this great move, rook to e3, sacrificing the rook on the square. Now, if Parham were to play bishop takes rook, there's queen takes pawn check, king c1, and after bishop b2, king b1, knight c3, the white king is getting checkmated in a couple of moves, and you lose the game. Additionally, if you play rook takes rook after knight takes and bishop takes, once again it's the same thing. Queen b4, if you go king d3, there's bishop a6 followed by checkmate after queen takes queen. And if you go king c1, now I can play bishop b2, king to b1 here, bishop c3. If you go king a2, there's queen a5 check. This is one mate. And if you go king c1, I go queen a3, checking the king. And after queen b2, queen takes queen, it's GG, why not? So after rook to e3, Parham plays this move knight fe4 out of desperation, because if you can't take the rook on e3, the other threat is bishop to c3. So he tries to basically guard everything. Rook is guarded by the knight and the bishop, and you stop bishop to c3, but it is to no avail. Noterbeck trades the rooks on h3, and now he plays this move h6, an excellent move attacking the knight here. Now it's worth pointing out that if Noterbeck were to invert the order with knight takes pawn here, after queen c1, queen a5, king to e3, and d5, for example, takes, white has this move queen c6, because now the pawn on f7 is very, very weak here, and white is very much in the game. But when h6 is played here, if the game continues, actually the game does continue with knight f3, we get knight takes b4, queen c1, and queen a5. If Parham here were to play the move bishop takes b4, takes, and king e3 in this situation, now after d5, the knight is no longer on the g5 square, pressuring the pawn on f7 because it's been removed, and white is just losing the game. Computer actually says queen 6 is the best move, but after takes and bishop e6, black has two extra pawns, better bishops than the bishop and the knight, and the white king is very weak. So Parham goes king e3, we get d5, and now he plays knight e d2. Actually, it could transpose with bishop takes b4 here as well, but he goes knight e d2. And now Noterbeck plays an excellent move. It might not be the absolute best move in the position, but he starts playing on both sides of the board with this nasty move h5, pressuring the pawn on g4. Now, on top of pressuring this pawn on g4, he opens up this idea of bishop h6 as well, and white has so many weak pieces here, with the king being weak, the bishop, the queen being weak, the bishop on h3 being weak, g4 being weak, and it's just a position which white cannot defend. To make matters worse, Parham only has 30 seconds here, so the game is totally hopeless. He plays king to f2, but now after pawn takes pawn, white will lose the extra piece, the knight or the bishop, due to the fork here. We get knight to b3 being played, queen c7 from Noterbeck, queen d2, pawn takes knight, trade of the bishops here, takes, and queen c8. And now Parham Maghsoodloo resigns the game. He's down 4 pawns here. King is very open in the center of the board, and it's just a totally hopeless position. So a fantastic win for Noterbeck, showing his tremendous tactical skills and abilities in this game. Simply outplays Parham in the mess. It's a game that I think one of the former world chess champions, Michael Tal, would be very proud of, because it's a game where Noterbeck sacked piece. Now sure, Parham had queen a3 winning, but after we got to this position with queen takes a2, it seemed like a pure attacking game, and very, very reminiscent of the world champions and the grandmasters of yesteryear. So fantastic win for Noterbeck in this game. He also moves to 2 out of 3, just like Ding Liren. The two leaders currently after 3 rounds are Anish Giri and Alireza Firouzja. Both players have won 2 games with 1 draw, whereas Ding Noterbeck, and a slew of other players are currently on 2 points out of 3 with 2 draws and 1 win. Nonetheless, it's great to see games like the game that Noterbeck won. It's also really nice to see Ding, the world chess champion, back in action and playing very well. So it'll be really exciting to see what happens in the coming rounds of the Tata Steel event. I believe it's 13 rounds, so still 10 more rounds to go before a victor is declared, but it's a very, very exciting start to the tournament. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed my recap from round 3 of the Tata Steel chess tournament being held in Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great YouTube only content. See you guys. Bye.